Throughout time, many writers have seemingly predicted the way our society would evolve. They wrote books about how it would become more restrictive, be more controlled, essentially becoming a dictatorship disguised as a free world. The question remains, however, who exactly are these visionaries such as Orwell, and how did they acquire such knowledge?
He was, by all accounts, an extremely nice guy. He worked for the BBC for quite a long time. He produced over, I think it was 125 shows for them. He interviewed some real top people, some really interesting people for that show, for his shows. Strangely, no record of his voice exists, even though he worked for the BBC for all that time. One of the reasons for that is because his throat was damaged in the Spanish Civil War. So his voice was slightly strange. What was he doing in the Spanish Civil War? A lot of very clever people got involved in the Spanish Civil War, which was, and can be proven to be, led by Freemasons. They were very proud of the fact that they were involved in that uprising. There are texts showing that they were pleased that they had got 5,000 people within the military. They actually stood there and said it and transcribed those details down. So we know that there is a secret society that was involved in revolutionary factions in Spain. George Orwell was one of the guys involved there. So involved that he got his throat shot. H.G. Wells was a man who was seriously into all the world of the esoteric secret societies. He got involved with Rosicrucians and all kinds of different things. Jules Verne, definitely a man who was involved. These are people that, as you rightly point out, were involved in the esoteric, involved in the secret societies, highly involved in politics. H.G. Wells was certainly, there's the man who coined the term New World Order. So they were definitely involved. H.G. Wells spent a lot of time in Russia with the communists, came back and gave a glowing report, some bad, some good, but mainly glowing. Spent time in America with the high up politicians there, was deeply influential with the UN, the beginnings of the UN. In fact, a lot of people think that the UN was formed from his very own ideas, and that's actually, historical fact, that he was deeply involved with that.
H.G. Wells, you mentioned. He was somebody, I would strongly recommend anybody watching to look into an organization called the Coefficients. And that was it was a think tank, really, one of the first British think tanks, and he was a member of it for, I think, at least 7 years, 1902, 1909, this kind of period. Bertrand Russell was also in that group, Sir Edward Grey. It was a real think tank of the British elite at that time, yeah? And it was brought together by Sidney and Beatrice Webb, who were socialists. So it was bilateral, you see. A bit like your New Labour project. Yeah? They were trying to draw together all kinds of people from different perspectives to answer the question, how can the empire survive in the 20th century and go forward in a position of dominance? And H.G. Wells was in there. And he, of course, came with his scientific idealism, his scientific utopianism. Personally, I would call him almost sort of bordering on a sort of a social fascism, which he had. Yeah? And that was really that the individual exists for the state.
Conan Doyle is another one. Conan Doyle was a Freemason, highly influential, built what they learnt into their stories, as George Orwell did. Knew full well that a lot of these secret societies' intentions were, as they saw it, good, but to create this utopia on Earth, to have this new Jerusalem. And I think that a lot of that comes through in the books.
Well, it's interesting that George Orwell was working for the BBC at the time that he wrote 1984, and apparently wrote some of it actually at Bush House, the headquarters of the World Service. So I think he had a certain insight into some of the rather more, should we say, extremist elements within the ruling class in this country. And I think he was aware that there is quite a nasty strain of ruling class people in Britain who have a lot of power and who have a complete disregard for human life. And that was seen in the Second World War to be something which was just simply a German thing. I think, yes, obviously it was largely, a Nazi ideology was totally pernicious towards human life, but I think they were documented, particularly in the United States, with George Bush's family and Prescott Bush. There was support for the Nazis within the Western world, and certainly within Britain. We had a king who had to be sort of quietly shuffled out of the way, who was pro-fascist, and I think there's clear evidence that there's still some kind of covert fascist influence within the British ruling class.
All the things that are going on all the levels, political, technological, secret society operations, black operations, are leaked to us in the movies. I don't really have a complete understanding of why they choose fictional means. I mean, you know, the jury's out. All I know is that they do it.
With online media playing such a fundamental role in our everyday lives, the effect of viewing alternative information in documentaries and presentations can have profound implications. And while you may want to inform everyone in your circle of friends and family, you may have some resistance to your attempt at enlightenment.
You get hurt because you suddenly found you've been told this like massive lie, you know, and most of the things that you believed in, have just been shattered. So as soon as you find something like that out, you start investigating more and more, and you think, well, what else have they done? What else have they been up to? You know, and I went down the road and I started looking at all this sort of kind of agenda. And one of my favourite books when I was a kid, was 1984. And I had read A Brave New World, but didn't rate it as much. But when I started looking at certain things to do with that and certain things that were going on in the world, a couple of things started to click.
I think the first reaction is incredulousness. Why, that can't be. You know, I didn't hear that on CNN or Fox. My parents didn't tell me about that. Nobody in school told me about that. But if you can get past that, and some people cannot, but if you can, then you start researching on your own, you suddenly find that the whole world and the history of the world is very different from what you've been taught.
I say that in my work, I'm always emphasizing that light both conceals as much as it reveals. And I'm kind of shocked that, people haven't noticed this simple dynamic. Light conceals as much as reveals. Could it be then that the Illuminati are using light because, for the same reason as a policeman, when he shines light in your face, he's blinding you? That light has this principle to also blind you?
In the United States, after all, we've put people in prison for conspiracy. And yet, when we talk about a conspiracy at the corporate or government level, they tend to poo-poo it and say, well, there can't be any such thing. What hogwash.
So who is running the show, you might ask? Well, that's the tricky part. This new world order is centuries in the making. And just when you think you've identified the bad guy, he's hung out to dry in an attempt to maintain face, as the agenda is all that matters, and no one is more important than the agenda. This is a team game, and the team serves the agenda, no matter what.
I think that you would have to look to business these days, and I think that you will find that battles still ensue, that religions still want to fight politicians and politicians want to fight religions, and that businessmen are on both sides. I think that you will find that the best places to look are not necessarily the elected politicians, but those unelected ones that we call civil servants. You will find that if you want to talk about bloodlines, there are some incredible bloodlines within the civil service. These are unelected officials which tell our elected officials, supposedly elected officials in our supposed democracy, what to do.
For me, I don't want to sit and go, these are the guys. I mean, you can sit and you can say, well, look, yeah, it's the Rothschilds, it's the Rockefellers, right? It's the Carnegies, it's the Freemasons. Yes, it is. It's also IBM, it's Hewlett-Packard, it's Sun, it's the tech companies, it's Mobil, it's Exxon. What has happened is the New World Order now is also multinational companies that operate above governments. So when you look at who actually does, and what's a really good provable point, is who does the census for the US? It's IBM. And they also get to GPS your front door as a bonus, right? Who does the census for Australia? It's IBM. And who does the census for Communist China? It's IBM. So here you have a company that operates above government and uses people's details supposedly in countries that are meant to be in conflict. So there's the New World Order at play. You have this illusion that you have China and America actually conflicting and fighting, or, you know, like allies but not really allies, yet the same company's doing the census. Like, so who's really running the show?
Though alternative media is on the increase, the mainstream networks and foundations have their own agenda, and they continue to tighten their grip around the unsuspecting public. Using icons of film and TV to subtly promote certain behaviors, you might think more people would be aware of the deception. But the New World Order is relentless in its endeavor, and the people are cleverly distracted like an audience in a hypnotist's sideshow. And the people are cleverly distracted like an audience in a hypnotist's sideshow.